back. Okay, today, reverse brake bleeding, simple skills. Now, what I want to do is show you this because you kind of need this sometimes when you're changing brake hoses. Whenever I've done brake fluid change simple skills or brake fluid change, clutch fluid change videos, what I've always done is chase the old fluid out with the new fluid. So effectively never letting air into the system, which is the kind of correct way to do it because you never let air in, so you don't have any messing around trying to bleed it up. Because trying to bleed a dry system up is quite difficult, it's quite tricky, and there are methods to do it, so that's what this is about today. You have no choice when you're changing a brake hose. Now, all the fabrication work has been practically done on this, so now I'm going to move into changing cycle parts that need to be changed, and they're going to do them in hit and miss order really. I've got everything from swing arm bearings to wheel bearings to brake discs to cush drives to chain sprockets, all sorts of things to change on this bike as time goes on. But today, last one of the year, last garage video of the year, I wanted to do something a little bit straightforward and not too taxing. It's simply changing a brake hose. Now, if you go and buy yourself, I've got this HEL one, I've got that from Remoto, so you can buy these, you know what they're like. Basically, that's a far better way forward. This bike has got braided steel brake hoses on the front, but the previous owner hasn't touched the back. This has still got the original crappy rubber brake hose on the back. So I'm going to change it and put this steel brake hose on, which will sharpen up the rear brake stiffness when time comes. Obviously, I'm going to do brake pads, any attention required to the brake caliper, it will all be done in time. Today, I just want to show you how to change a brake hose and bleed it up when it's bone dry, which is really tricky, not as easy as just chasing through the fluid, and this is the easiest way to do it possible. I'll show you how it's done. Right, first of all, take off the old one, drain the water, drain the fluid out of it first. Water. If there's any water in it, drain it out too. And then get yourself clear, everything clean, ready to fit the new hose. Get rid of that squidgy old thing. I don't know why they used to fit rubber hoses. I've had braided steel hoses for about 50 years. Right, now braided steel hose. Just going to pop it on the bike first and I'll show you how to bleed it up. Okay, there's the hose fitted, all ready to go. Now this is one of the most difficult parts because when you've got a fully bled up system, like I said, there's fluid that hydraulically will act like a lock and it will suck the new fluid through, ever so easy. But in this case, you've just got a bone dry pipe there. That hose, that brake hose, is absolutely bone dry. There's no fluid in it whatsoever. Now there are methods, there are loads and loads of methods to do this, and I know all of you have got your favourite methods, but I just wanted to show you this one that works for me. All you need to do is get a little bit of fluid into the caliper and into that dry hose, and then you can start bleeding up as normal. So all I do, quite simple, just drop in the chemist, pick up a little hypodermic syringe, one of those ones with a little tube on the end, and a piece of rubber pipe, and inject the fluid from the bottom. Inject it into the bleed valve, so you're pushing fluid into the caliper, which primes the caliper, and then up into the hose itself, and put as much in as you need to. Now, really and honestly, I should have got a bigger one, but I tried everywhere to get a larger one. I would have had to go online to get a proper large size one, and then inject it all the way in. But I'm going to show you the basic principle with this so you can see what I mean. See how it works. Right, there we are. Simplest principle ever, really. Take a short piece of hose, rubber hose is good, and looking at the internal bore of that, you can see it's only 3mm, which is the exact same inside bore as this hose here. The hose itself doesn't hold a lot of fluid, very, very little, and one of these little tiny syringes you get free from the chemist, 4 of those will fill up the caliper and the hose itself. If it's a rear, if it's front, it's going to take a bit more, perhaps try harder and get a little bigger one. I should have got a bigger one, but I just couldn't do it today. It's Christmas week, I couldn't do that, so there we are, I got that one, and with just 4 of those, 4 or 5 of those, it filled it up. As I said, the simple principle is open the valve, inject the fluid in, and shut the valve so it can't squeeze back out because there's air behind it. And then when you've injected 4 or 5 of these in, press the brake pedal down, and that will open the valve inside here and the air will all bubble out the top. And now the system is about 90% full of fluid. It's a darn sight easier to bleed up. I've topped up the reservoir, so now I'm going to bleed it up in the normal, conventional way. Right, now when you get down to those little champagne bubbles, you know, little tiny fizzy bubbles, those are the ones that can take just ages to keep pushing through. If you imagine you had a big blob of air there, you're shoving stuff past it, you're shoving it round through corners, you're shoving it round the pistons, you're shoving it out through a bleed valve, and an air bubble just gets fragmented. It gets atomized into loads of tiny little fizzy bubbles, but they'll gang up together in the future as a lump and they'll become one big bubble and you'll have spongy brakes. I've had so many people write and say, oh my God, no matter how many times, how many gallons of fluid I bleed through it, it's still spongy. Yes, it is, because you're never going to get them all out, those tiny little bubbles. Little things that I see people do quite often is never put this, no matter how clean it is, back in the system. Don't go tipping that back in the top. Oh, it's nice and clean. That's not the dirty stuff. That's just the new stuff bleeding through. But remember, it's full of air. And those microscopic bubbles are in there. If you looked at it under a microscope, you'd see them, little tiny bubbles, and that will stay fizzy for probably a day or so. A little tricks is, don't ever shake your bottle of brake fluid. Come on, think about it. If there's an air gap in the top, you'll mix it all in with the fluid and it's full of air. So there's one of the reasons why sometimes you just can't fathom why you just can't get the air out, because often you've got aerated fluid from doing silly things like shaking the bottle, or you've got just general aeration from having one big bubble that's got to a point in the system as you're bleeding it through with lots of sharp corners, and that just atomizes the bubble and it aerates the fluid, and you just never get rid of it because then it spreads throughout the system. And obviously there's the biggest thing here is nature. Obviously air rises to the surface and we're pumping it from here down, 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 all the way to the bleed valve at the bottom. It's the opposite way up, isn't it? So here's what I do once I've bled it through like I have now to get an absolutely clear system. There are little tiny micro bubbles in it and you can just about see them with the naked eye, but they're there, and as I said, they will gang up in the future and they'll add up to a bubble, and that bubble will make spongy brake. And there's no need for that. You've paid for a braided hose and you should be able to achieve a rock hard solid brake pedal every single time. If there's no air in it whatsoever, it won't have any sponginess. If there's sponginess, there's air in it. Can it change the laws of physics, Jim? Right, I'm taking the rear caliper off now, off the bike. This might not always be possible, depending on your situation, but I'm going to take the caliper off the disc and I'm going to lift it above the level of the master cylinder itself, the pump here, and the reservoir. I'm going to pick it right up to here, grab a cable tie, like that. So now, any air bubbles in the system are naturally working their way upwards to the exit, which is going to be here, the bleed valve. And all I'm going to do is leave that now for about half an hour and then come back and hopefully, fingers crossed in theory, any air that was in the system should have worked its way up. And then one more bleed through will mean that I'm not forcing those bubbles downhill and then every time I stop, they're creeping back uphill. So you're squeezing them back and forth, chasing your tail around in circles. So let's leave that half an hour, I'll come back and we will definitely get a chunk more air out of that in a minute. Just tap the hose. Just help those bubbles work their way up, just in case they get lodged against each other. Looks a bit silly, but it works. Now obviously, there's no disc in between the pads, so use your common sense. I'm just going to use a little bit of an old cutting disc, slip it in between the pads to represent the disc and stop them popping out and then mess everywhere and start over again. It's a little bit rub tummy pat head because you kind of need 3 pairs of hands, but you get the picture. There we go. Right, so you can see the principle there. I'm going to slap all this back together and then I think that's it done. Right, there we are. Okay, so just to recap, at the risk of repeating myself, it's 2 simple skills there really for you. Simple way to get absolutely rock hard brakes. Even if you're still using the rubber hoses, you can maximise the effect of having absolutely no air in the system. First one is to inject a little bit of fluid up its backside through the bleed valve first and prime that hose. If you prime the hose, then you'll be able to bleed it through in the normal way. And the second thing, if you can, if it's possible, the way that your braking system is configured, hang that caliper up above the source of the fluid coming in, and then all the bubbles will float up to the caliper and you can just squirt them out the top. A couple of other very basic little things. I think brake fluid or brake bleeding niggles, woes and difficulties are singularly the biggest comment and cry for help that we get every single time. They really are, probably 2 to 1 over and above everything else, because there are so many little funny principles. Look out for those fizzy bubbles, those tiny little microscopic bubbles you can barely see. You might think they're nothing and they're not important, but they really are, because like I said, they gang up together and they become a big bubble, and that is what you don't want. If you saw that, you'd soon want that out, wouldn't you? So get rid of those. Never shake the fluid in the bottle. If you've done that, leave it to stand for a week or a month before you even go near it, because those bubbles will just sit there suspended. They won't move. You know, the smaller they are, the less likely they are to float up to the surface. And don't reuse the fluid that you squirt into the jug when you're bleeding through, because it's aerated. So use fresh fluid from the bottle each time. Treat the bottle carefully. Treat it like it's nitroglycerin. Don't bang it, don't knock it around, don't inject any air into it. And hopefully, with all those principles practiced, you should get a solid, rock-hard brake pedal or brake lever every single time. It's not difficult, it just takes practice. All these simple skills are simply, if we may be so bold, to impart a simple way. I do it, it works for me. It may not be the perfect way, it may be the technician's way as per the college, but ultimately it works. It's worked for me for 30 years, and if you can practice it, make it work for you, then all is good. There we go. Right, so this is the last garage video for this year, 2017. Thank you for all of your amazing support for this year, but it's not over yet. You can join us tomorrow for the one and only Mr. Dyson and a Q&A. Take it easy, ride safe. See you tomorrow.
And how they do. And yet they know that there is a power